She ruled the most powerful civilization on Earth for over 20 years. She commanded armies, built monuments that still stand today, and became one of the wealthiest rulers in history. And they tried to erase every trace of her existence. Her own stepson spent decades chiseling her name off every monument, smashing her statues, and rewriting history books to pretend she never existed. But here's what they didn't count on: you can't erase greatness. And the revenge? 3,000 years later, she's the one everybody remembers. What she did to the men who dismissed her is absolutely brutal. Subscribe to see how this story ends. Because this is what ultimate power looked like in ancient Egypt. Hatshepsut didn't just become pharaoh, she became one of the most successful pharaohs in 3,000 years of Egyptian history. We're talking about a woman who expanded trade routes to lands Egypt had only dreamed of, who built architectural wonders so magnificent they're still standing today, who commanded the loyalty of the most powerful military in the ancient world. Picture this. The year is around 1470 BCE. The entire Mediterranean trembles at the mention of Egypt. And sitting on the throne, wearing the false beard of the pharaohs, holding the crook and flail, symbols of absolute power, is Hatshepsut. Not as queen. Not as regent. As pharaoh. King of Upper and Lower Egypt. Lord of the two lands. Her trading expedition to the land of Punt. It brought back treasures beyond imagination: gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animals, incense trees. Resources that made Egypt even wealthier than it already was. Her building projects. The mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is considered one of the architectural masterpieces of the ancient world. Egyptologists call it incomparable. But here's what makes this absolutely insane: women weren't supposed to be pharaoh. Period. The entire system, 3,000 years of tradition, religion, law, social structure, was built to prevent exactly what she did. Egypt had queens, sure. Powerful queens. But pharaoh? That was sacred. That was divine. That was male. So how did a woman, in one of the most rigidly patriarchal societies in human history, not just take the throne but hold it for over 20 years? How did she convince the priests, the generals, the nobles, the people? How did she convince an entire civilization that she had the right to wear the double crown of Egypt? Because it wasn't luck. It wasn't even just ambition. It was cold, calculated, brilliant strategy. And it starts with understanding just how powerless she was supposed to be. If you're already hooked, smash that like button. If you're thinking there's no way this story gets better, oh, just wait. Let's rewind to where Hatshepsut actually started. Born around 1507 BCE, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Ahmose. Now, you might think being born a princess means you're set for life. And sure, she had wealth, luxury, education. But in terms of actual power, she had none. Because here's the thing about ancient Egypt: it was a theocracy wrapped in divine kingship. The pharaoh wasn't just a political leader, he was literally considered a living god. The son of Ra. The embodiment of Horus. And notice I keep saying he. That wasn't an accident. The entire theological framework was built around male succession. Women could be powerful in Egypt, more so than in most ancient civilizations. They could own property, conduct business, get divorced. But pharaoh? That role was so intertwined with male imagery and masculine divine power that it seemed impossible for a woman to claim it. The pharaoh wore the false beard. The pharaoh was depicted with a bare, masculine chest. The pharaoh was he in every inscription, every prayer, every ritual text. So when Hatshepsut was born, everyone knew her role: she'd be married off to strengthen political alliances. She'd be a great royal wife. She'd produce heirs. That was it. That was her ceiling. No matter how intelligent, how educated, how capable she was, her gender was a prison. And then her father died. Thutmose I had no legitimate sons with Ahmose, so the throne passed to Thutmose II, Hatshepsut's half-brother, born to a lesser wife. This was common practice to keep the royal bloodline pure. Royal women married their half-brothers all the time. So Hatshepsut was married to Thutmose II. She became great royal wife. And now here's where it gets really frustrating. Thutmose II was, by all accounts, a weak ruler. Ancient texts describe him as sickly. His reign was unremarkable. Some historians think Hatshepsut was essentially running things even then, making decisions behind the scenes because her husband was too ill to do the job. But did she get credit? Did anyone acknowledge her brilliance? Of course not. She was the wife. She was supposed to stand there looking regal and producing heirs. Never mind that she was the one with the legitimate royal bloodline. Never mind that she clearly had the intellect and capability to rule. And then, adding insult to injury, she and Thutmose II had only one child together, a daughter, Neferurah. No son. Which meant when Thutmose II eventually died after just a few years on the throne, the succession got messy. Because Thutmose II did have a son, Thutmose III, born to a minor wife named Isis. This kid was maybe 2 or 3 years old when his father died. A toddler. And according to tradition, according to law, according to everything Egypt believed about divine kingship, this little boy was the rightful pharaoh. Not Hatshepsut, who had royal blood from both sides of her family. Not Hatshepsut, who had been running the kingdom while her husband was sick. Not Hatshepsut, who was an adult with education, experience, and capability. No. A toddler. Because he had a penis and she didn't. The disrespect. The absolute disrespect of this system. Imagine being the most qualified person in the room and watching them hand the job to a literal toddler. Now imagine what you'd have to do to take it back. Keep watching. So Thutmose III becomes pharaoh. And Hatshepsut? She becomes regent. Which sounds like power, and in a way it was. She'd rule in the boy's name until he came of age. But it was also a trap. Because being regent meant she had an expiration date. Eventually, Thutmose III would grow up. He'd reach adulthood, probably around age 14 or 15 by Egyptian standards. And then she'd have to step aside. Hand over power. Go back to being just another royal woman with no real authority. Now let's talk about the barriers she faced. First, religion. The entire religious framework of Egypt was built around male pharaohs. Every ritual, every prayer, every ceremony assumed the pharaoh was male. The coronation rites. The Sed festival. The daily temple services. All of it was gendered male. Second, precedent. Egypt was 3,000 years old at this point. 3,000 years of male pharaohs. Sure, there were a couple of women who might have ruled in desperate circumstances. Sobneferu had possibly been pharaoh at the end of the Middle Kingdom when the dynasty was collapsing. But those were emergency situations, not legitimate, accepted rule. There was no roadmap for what Hatshepsut wanted to do. Third, the power structure. The priests controlled religion and had enormous influence. The military controlled force. The nobles controlled land and resources. All of these groups were run by men, benefited from the existing system, and had zero incentive to support a woman pharaoh. Why would they risk religious chaos, political instability, and their own positions to back something that had never been done? Fourth, Thutmose III himself. Yes, he was a child. But he had supporters. His mother, Isis, definitely wanted him on the throne. What mother wouldn't? He had tutors, advisors, probably military commanders who saw potential in grooming a young pharaoh they could influence. Hatshepsut wasn't just fighting abstract tradition. She was fighting actual people with actual interests in maintaining the status quo. And fifth, language itself. The Egyptian language didn't even have good words for a female pharaoh. The title pharaoh was masculine. The royal titulary, the 5 names every pharaoh took, used masculine grammar. How do you claim a title that doesn't grammatically accommodate your existence? Everyone around her was telling her this was impossible. The priests would say the gods wouldn't accept it. The generals would say the army needed a warrior king. The nobles would say it would bring chaos. The scholars would say there was no precedent. The people would say it went against Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order and justice. But here's what they didn't understand about Hatshepsut. She saw an opportunity where everyone else saw obstacles. Because yes, she was regent. Yes, she was constrained. But she also held real power right now. She was making decisions. She was issuing orders. She had access to the treasury, the military, the priesthood. She was already doing the job of Pharaoh. She just wasn't getting the title. And somewhere in those early years of regency, I think she realized something crucial. If she was brilliant enough, strategic enough, patient enough, she could change the unchangeable. The system said women couldn't be Pharaoh. She was going to prove that the system was wrong. The audacity. The absolute audacity of looking at 3,000 years of tradition and saying nah. Comment below, would you have the guts to do what she did? So how do you become Pharaoh when everything says you can't? You start small. You start smart. And you never, ever show your full hand until you're ready. Hatshepsut's first strategic move was deceptively simple. She was an excellent regent. She didn't cause problems. She didn't make controversial decisions. She maintained stability, continued her father's policies, kept the economy strong, kept the borders secure. She gave nobody any reason to complain. And while she was doing that, she was building relationships. She identified key people she needed on her side and she cultivated them carefully. One of the most important was Senenmut. Senenmut was a commoner who rose to become one of the most powerful officials in Egypt. He was brilliant, architect, steward, tutor to Hatshepsut's daughter. Some historians think he was her lover, though there's no definitive proof. What we know for sure is that he became her most trusted advisor and most loyal supporter. Hatshepsut also courted the priesthood of Amun, the most powerful religious institution in Egypt. She made generous donations to the temples. She commissioned building projects. She showed deep piety and respect for religious tradition. She made sure the priests saw her as a defender of the faith, not a threat to it. And then she started testing the waters. Around year 2 or 3 of her regency, inscriptions started changing. Subtly. Instead of just regent for Thutmose III, some texts started listing her with more elaborate titles. God's wife of Amun. Lady of the Two Lands. Small escalations. Seeing how people reacted. She was brilliant at reading the room. When there was pushback, she'd step back slightly. When there was acceptance, she'd push a little further. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Always advancing, but never so quickly that it triggered a revolt. Then came her first major public move. She started appearing in ceremonies alongside Thutmose III. Not behind him like a regent should. Next to him. Equal positioning. And she started wearing more elaborate regalia. More crowns. More ceremonial dress. Visually claiming more and more pharaonic authority. But here's where it gets really clever. She framed all of this as being for Thutmose III. She wasn't challenging him. No, she was supporting him. The kingdom needed strong leadership, and she was providing it until the young pharaoh was ready. She was fulfilling her duty as a loyal member of the royal family. It was gaslighting on a national scale. She was accumulating pharaonic power while insisting she was just a humble regent. And it worked. Because she was doing such a good job running Egypt that people started to accept it. The economy was thriving. The borders were secure. Why rock the boat? Around year 7 of Thutmose III's reign, something remarkable happened. Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh. Not regent. Not co-ruler. Pharaoh. She took the full royal titulary. 5 names, as every pharaoh had. Her throne name was Martkeh. Truth is the soul of Ra. She adopted the prenomen and nomen, the Horus name, the golden Horus name, the two ladies' name. Everything. She underwent the coronation ceremony. She became, in every legal and religious sense, Pharaoh of Egypt. And the absolutely brilliant part? She didn't depose Thutmose III. He was still technically Pharaoh too. Egypt now had 2 pharaohs. It was unprecedented, but it gave her a cover story. She wasn't overthrowing the rightful king. She was sharing the throne. Co-ruling. It was enough ambiguity that people could accept it without feeling like they were betraying tradition. Of course, everyone knew who really held power. Thutmose III was maybe 10 years old at this point. He wasn't making decisions. Hatshepsut was. But the fiction of co-rule let everyone save face. This was her first major victory. She'd done what everyone said was impossible. She was Pharaoh. And the kingdom hadn't collapsed into chaos. The gods hadn't struck her down. The sky hadn't fallen. She'd proven that a woman could wear the double crown. Now she just had to prove she deserved to keep it. She literally rewrote the rules of an entire civilization. If that's not boss energy, I don't know what is. Hit that like button if you're impressed. Okay, so Hatshepsut is Pharaoh. But being Pharaoh and being successful at it are two very different things. She needed to prove she wasn't just a woman playing dress-up in her dead husband's clothes. She needed to show Egypt, and more importantly, show history, that she was a legitimate, effective ruler. So she got to work. And this is where her strategic genius really shines. First challenge, legitimacy. How do you convince a deeply religious society that you have divine right to rule when the entire theological framework says you shouldn't? Hatshepsut's solution was brilliant. She claimed direct divine appointment. She commissioned inscriptions that told a story of her divine birth. According to these texts, the god Amun himself came to her mother Ahmose, took the form of her father Thutmose I, and conceived Hatshepsut. She was literally the daughter of a god. Not adopted. Not blessed. Biologically divine. Now, was this true? Obviously not. But here's the thing, other pharaohs made similar claims all the time. This was standard propaganda. The difference was Hatshepsut needed it more. She was using every tool available to legitimate her rule, and if that meant rewriting her own origin story, then so be it. She also dealt with the gender problem head-on, by essentially erasing it. Early in her reign, depictions of her showed her in traditional female dress. But as time went on, her official imagery became increasingly masculine. She was shown wearing the pharaoh's false beard. Wearing the Nemes headdress. Depicted with a bare, male chest. Using masculine pronouns and grammatical forms. Some people interpret this as Hatshepsut pretending to be a man. I think that's missing the point. She wasn't trying to be male. She was trying to embody the role of Pharaoh, which happened to be coded as masculine. The office required certain imagery, and she was providing it. It was brilliant political theater. Second challenge, proving competence. Hatshepsut knew she had to deliver results. So she focused on Egypt's prosperity. She expanded trade networks, bringing in wealth from across the known world. She maintained peace and stability. There were no major wars during her reign, which some critics later used against her, but which the Egyptian people probably appreciated. She initiated massive building projects. This wasn't just ego, though it was definitely partly ego. Building was how pharaohs proved their power, honored the gods, and ensured their immortality. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at el-Bahari is considered one of the most beautiful buildings in ancient Egypt. It's carved into the cliffside, 3 terraces rising up to the mountain, filled with colonnades and statues and reliefs. She also built extensively at Karnak Temple, the center of Amun worship. Red Chapel, sacred bark, pairs of obelisks. She was making sure the priests stayed happy and reminding everyone constantly of her devotion to the gods. Third challenge, managing her relationship with Thutmose III. Remember, he was still technically co-pharaoh. As he got older, 14, 15, 16, he was certainly capable of ruling on his own. But Hatshepsut didn't step aside. She kept the dominant position. How did she manage this? Partly through continuing to be really good at the job. Why replace something that's working? Partly through keeping Thutmose III involved but controlled. He led military campaigns, participated in ceremonies, but always under her overall authority. And partly through Senenmut and her other allies maintaining control of key institutions. She also made sure to present their relationship as harmonious. Inscriptions showed them ruling together in perfect cooperation. Whether that was true or whether Thutmose III was seething with resentment, we'll get to that later. What's remarkable is that she held power for over 20 years. 2 decades. That's longer than many male pharaohs ruled. She survived potential coups, religious opposition, political intrigue. She built alliances, managed threats, and kept Egypt stable and prosperous. She made enemies, of course. The traditionalists who never accepted a female pharaoh. The supporters of Thutmose III who wanted him to rule alone. Rival factions within the priesthood or nobility. But she managed them. She played the political game better than almost anyone. Her biggest asset was her competence. She was just really, really good at being pharaoh. The economy thrived. The people were fed. The gods were honored. The borders were secure. What more could you ask for? 20 years. She held absolute power for 20 years in a system designed to exclude her. The greatest told you so in ancient history. Are you subscribed yet? No. Fix that. But Hatshepsut wasn't content with just being a competent administrator. She wanted to be remembered as one of the greatest pharaohs Egypt had ever seen. And for that, she needed a signature achievement. Something spectacular. Something that would prove she wasn't just maintaining what others had built, she was expanding Egypt's reach and glory. Enter, the expedition to Punt. Punt was a legendary trading partner, somewhere along the Red Sea coast, probably modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. Egypt had traded with Punt for centuries, but expeditions there were rare and difficult. The journey required ships capable of crossing the Red Sea, and the rewards were exotic goods that Egypt couldn't get anywhere else: frankincense, myrrh, ebony, ivory, gold, exotic animals. Hatshepsut organized the most ambitious expedition to Punt in Egyptian history. She commissioned a fleet of 5 ships, each massive by ancient standards, 70 feet long. She sent hundreds of men, sailors, soldiers, traders, officials. She gave them gold and goods to trade. And when they returned, it was a triumph. They brought back incredible wealth, over 31 live myrrh trees, which were transplanted to Egypt and successfully grown there for the first time. Gold, ivory, ebony, animal skins, live animals including baboons and leopards. Massive quantities of myrrh and frankincense resin for temple ceremonies. This wasn't just trade. This was a propaganda coup. Hatshepsut had the entire expedition documented in elaborate detail at her mortuary temple. There are massive reliefs showing the ships being loaded, the voyage, the meeting with the rulers of Punt, the exotic goods being transported back to Egypt. The inscriptions describe it as a divine mission. Hatshepsut claimed that the god Amun himself commanded her to establish trade routes to Punt. She was fulfilling the will of the gods, bringing divine incense to the temples, enriching Egypt with resources blessed by heaven. And it worked. The expedition made her popular. The people saw the exotic animals paraded through the streets. The priests got their precious incense. The nobles benefited from the trade. Everyone could see tangible proof of Hatshepsut's successful rule. But here's what really set Hatshepsut apart: she understood propaganda better than almost any ruler in history. Everything she did, she made sure people knew about. The expedition to Punt could have been just a successful trade mission. Instead, she turned it into a national event, a religious triumph, a permanent monument to her greatness. Her building projects weren't just functional, they were billboards. Every temple she expanded, every obelisk she raised, every statue she commissioned was carved with her names, her titles, her achievements. She plastered her propaganda across the landscape. And crucially, she framed everything in religious terms. She wasn't ambitious, she was pious. She wasn't power-hungry, she was fulfilling divine will. She wasn't breaking tradition, she was honored by the gods. This religious framing gave her a shield against criticism. Who could argue with the will of Amun? Her mortuary temple is a perfect example. It's called Giza Geseru, Holy of Holies. The location she chose was sacred, right next to an ancient shrine. The design was revolutionary, nothing like it had been built before. And every wall, every column, every surface told her story. Reliefs showing her divine birth. Scenes of her coronation by the gods. The expedition to Punt. Her military victories, because yes, she led military campaigns too, despite later propaganda claiming she was weak. Her building projects. Her offerings to the gods. It was a 3-dimensional resume carved in stone. A permanent record of why she deserved to be pharaoh. And it was beautiful, even today, 3,000 years later, it's considered one of the most magnificent buildings in Egypt. But while Hatshepsut was at the height of her power, while she was building monuments and leading expeditions and basking in her success, her enemies were watching and waiting. She built monuments so incredible they're still standing 3,500 years later. That's how you make sure history doesn't forget you. Or so she thought. Around year 22 of Hatshepsut's reign, things started to change. Senenmut, her most trusted advisor and possibly her lover, disappeared from the historical record. Just vanished. No death announcement, no burial honors, nothing. Some historians think he fell out of favor. Some think he died naturally. Some think Thutmose III had him killed. We don't know. But his disappearance was ominous. Because Thutmose III was no longer a child. He was in his 20s now, maybe early 30s. He'd been pharaoh his entire life but never truly ruled. He'd led military campaigns, yes. He'd performed ceremonial duties. But he'd always been in Hatshepsut's shadow, always the junior partner. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? To be told from childhood that you're pharaoh, that you're a living god, that Egypt is yours, but never actually having power? Watching your stepmother make all the decisions, take all the glory, build all the monuments. Knowing that when people thought of the pharaoh, they thought of her, not you. The resentment must have been enormous. And Thutmose III had supporters, military commanders who wanted a warrior pharaoh, nobles who preferred the traditional male succession, priests who never accepted Hatshepsut's rule. Hatshepsut probably knew the clock was ticking. She was getting older, probably in her 40s by this point, which was elderly by ancient standards. Her health might have been declining. Her network of allies was weakening with age and death. And Thutmose III was getting stronger. He was building his own power base, cultivating relationships with the military, proving himself in battle. Everything Hatshepsut had carefully controlled was starting to slip. The crisis came when Hatshepsut died. We don't know exactly when, maybe around 1458 BCE, around year 22 of her reign. We don't know how, natural causes, illness, possibly murder, though there's no evidence of that. What we do know is that when she died, Thutmose III finally had unchallenged power. And he was angry. This is where the attempted erasure begins. Maybe immediately after her death, maybe 20 years later, historians debate the timeline. Thutmose III launched a systematic campaign to erase Hatshepsut from history. He had her name chiseled off monuments. Every cartouche bearing Martkare, every inscription mentioning Hatshepsut, carved away. Her statues were smashed, defaced, buried. Her obelisks were walled up so her names couldn't be seen. In king lists that recorded every pharaoh, her name was simply omitted. The succession jumped straight from Thutmose II to Thutmose III, as if she'd never existed. This wasn't just vandalism. This was damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. In Egyptian belief, your existence in the afterlife depended on people remembering you, speaking your name, making offerings. By erasing her name, Thutmose III was trying to kill her twice, once in life and once in death. Why? Was it just personal hatred? Partly, maybe. But it was also political. Hatshepsut had broken the natural order. She'd proven that a woman could be pharaoh. That was dangerous. What if it happened again? What if future royal women looked at Hatshepsut's example and thought they could do the same? Thutmose III needed to restore traditional male succession. And that meant making Hatshepsut disappear. Making her an anomaly that would never be repeated. A cautionary tale, if anything. Look what happens when women step outside their proper role. For almost 3,000 years, it worked. Hatshepsut became a footnote, a mystery, barely remembered even by scholars. But here's what Thutmose III didn't understand: you can't erase someone who built monuments that magnificent. You can't destroy someone who touched that many lives. You can't kill someone who was that brilliant. He spent decades trying to erase her. Imagine being so threatened by a woman that you dedicate your reign to pretending she never existed. Now watch what happens next. Because here's the beautiful irony: Thutmose III went on to become one of Egypt's greatest warrior pharaohs. He conquered territories from Nubia to Syria. He fought 17 military campaigns. He expanded Egypt's empire to its greatest extent. Historians call him the Napoleon of Egypt. And guess what? Most people today have never heard of him. But Hatshepsut? The woman he tried to erase? She's famous. She's one of the most well-known pharaohs in history. There are entire museums exhibitions dedicated to her. Documentaries, books, academic papers, travel guides. She's more remembered, more studied, more celebrated than Thutmose III could ever dream of being. That is the revenge. He tried to condemn her to oblivion, and instead she became immortal. He tried to make her a warning, and instead she became an inspiration. He tried to prove that women shouldn't be Pharaoh, and instead he proved that even when you try to erase a great woman, she still wins. Let me tell you how we rediscovered her. In the 1800s, when European archaeologists started seriously studying ancient Egypt, they noticed something weird. There were these damaged inscriptions, smashed statues, defaced cartouches all over Thebes. Someone had clearly tried to destroy them. But whose? Scholars started piecing it together. The cartouches that remained showed a pharaoh's name, Martkare. But this pharaoh wasn't in the king lists. There was this mysterious gap in the historical record between Thutmose II and Thutmose III. Then they found her mortuary temple at el-Bahari. It had been partly buried, partly destroyed, partly looted. But it was still magnificent. The reliefs told the story: a pharaoh who claimed divine birth, who led the expedition to Punt, who built monuments across Egypt. And in some places, despite the vandalism, you could still read the name, Hatshepsut. Slowly, painstakingly, archaeologists reconstructed her story. They studied the defaced monuments. They found statues that had been buried rather than completely destroyed. They analyzed the inscriptions, the art style, the architectural innovations. They cross-referenced with king lists from different periods. And piece by piece, Hatshepsut came back. They discovered she'd been pharaoh for over 20 years. That she'd been incredibly successful. That her reign was a period of peace and prosperity. That she'd expanded trade, built architectural wonders, maintained Egypt's power. In 2007, they even found her mummy. DNA testing confirmed it was her, identified partly because she had terrible teeth, which matched historical references to her dental problems. She was lying in an unmarked tomb, hidden away, but she was there. She'd survived. And now Hatshepsut is recognized as one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history. Scholars study her reign as a model of effective governance. Her mortuary temple is one of the most visited sites in Egypt. Her name is spoken thousands of times a day by tour guides, professors, students, tourists. She's not just remembered. She's celebrated. She's held up as proof that women have always been capable of leadership, power, and greatness, even when systems tried to deny them that right. Thutmose III thought he could rewrite history. But history had other plans. Because you can chisel away names. You can smash statues. You can omit someone from king lists. But you can't destroy achievement. You can't erase impact. You can't kill greatness. Hatshepsut built monuments so magnificent, created wealth so vast, ruled so effectively that even 3,000 years and a dedicated erasure campaign couldn't make her disappear. She was too brilliant, too successful, too great to be forgotten. And that is the ultimate revenge against patriarchy. They tried to exclude her. They tried to erase her. They tried to pretend she never existed. She won anyway. 3,000 years later, and she's the one we remember. Here's a footnote in her story. Tell me that's not the most satisfying revenge you've ever heard. But let's talk about why her story was buried for so long and why we're only now truly understanding her significance. For most of modern history, Egyptology was dominated by men. When archaeologists first started finding evidence of Hatshepsut, many of them couldn't wrap their heads around a female pharaoh. They assumed she must have been a usurper, a power-hungry woman who stole the throne from its rightful heir. They called her reign an anomaly, an irregularity. Early scholars portrayed her as the villain and Thutmose III as the victim. Poor young pharaoh, they said, kept from his rightful power by his ambitious stepmother. When he finally took control, he was just correcting historical injustice by erasing her. But modern scholarship has completely flipped that narrative. We now understand that Hatshepsut's rule was legitimate by Egyptian standards. She didn't seize power in a coup, she gradually assumed authority while maintaining legal fictions that made it acceptable. She ruled with the support of the priesthood, the nobility, and the people. Her reign was stable and prosperous. The erasure wasn't because she was a bad ruler. It was because she was a woman who proved that women could rule just as well as men. And that was dangerous to the patriarchal order. Think about what Hatshepsut proved. She proved that the theological justifications for male-only rule were bullshit. The gods didn't strike her down. Egypt didn't fall into chaos. The cosmic order didn't collapse. In fact, Egypt thrived under her leadership. She proved that all the reasons given for excluding women from power were just excuses. Women aren't too emotional to rule. Hatshepsut maintained peace for 20 years. Women can't command respect. Hatshepsut had the loyalty of priests, generals, and the common people. Women can't handle complex governance. Hatshepsut managed the economy, diplomacy, building projects, and religious affairs simultaneously. She didn't just succeed despite being a woman. She succeeded, period. Her gender was irrelevant to her capability. That's what made her so threatening. That's why they tried so hard to erase her. And here's what's beautiful. In trying to erase her, they made her even more significant. If Thutmose III had just let her be remembered, she'd be one interesting pharaoh among many. But the erasure, the defaced monuments, the mystery, that made her legendary. Today, Hatshepsut represents something much bigger than one ancient Egyptian ruler. She's proof that women have always fought for power and recognition. She's proof that patriarchal systems have always tried to suppress women's achievements. And she's proof that even the most determined erasure campaigns ultimately fail. Her story resonates because it's timeless. How many women throughout history had their achievements stolen, minimized, or attributed to men? How many women were written out of history books? How many brilliant women were reduced to footnotes or forgotten entirely? Hatshepsut is a reminder that those women existed. They fought. They achieved. They mattered. And even when systems tried to erase them, the truth has a way of surfacing. We're reclaiming Hatshepsut's story now because we finally understand its importance. We're seeing her not as an anomaly but as an example. Not as a woman who somehow managed to rule despite her gender, but as a ruler who happened to be a woman. And we're learning from her strategy. She worked within the system while simultaneously subverting it. She used the tools available to her, religion, propaganda, political alliances, to achieve what everyone said was impossible. She proved that change doesn't always require revolution, sometimes it requires brilliance, patience, and strategic thinking. Most importantly, she proved that you can't keep greatness down. You can chisel it away, bury it, ignore it, deny it. But if it's real, if it's substantial, if it's built on actual achievement, it will come back. Hatshepsut is more famous now than she ever was in her lifetime. Her temple still stands. Her name is spoken. Her story inspires. The pharaoh they tried to erase is now one of the most celebrated rulers in history. If that's not ultimate revenge, I don't know what is. So let's recap this absolutely insane story. Hatshepsut was born into a system designed to exclude her from power. She was married off to her sickly half-brother, expected to produce heirs and stay quiet. When he died, a toddler became pharaoh instead of her, because he was male and she wasn't. But Hatshepsut looked at 3,000 years of male-only rule and said, "Watch me." She became regent, then co-pharaoh, then effectively sole ruler. She ruled Egypt for over 20 years with brilliant strategic thinking, religious propaganda, and undeniable competence. She expanded trade, built monuments, maintained peace, and made Egypt wealthy. And when she died, her stepson tried to erase every trace of her existence. He chiseled away her name, smashed her statues, removed her from history books. He spent decades trying to make her disappear. They tried to erase her. They failed. 3,000 years later, She's the one we remember. She's the one whose story inspires. She's the one who proved that women have always been capable of greatness, even when systems tried to deny them that right. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge, hit subscribe right now. Every week on Crowned in History, we bring you stories of women who history tried to erase, and who won anyway. And here's my question for you. What modern woman do you think history will try to erase? Drop your answers in the comments. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. Remember, they can chisel away the names. They can smash the statues. But they can't destroy greatness. Hatshepsut proved that. And so will we.